And welcome back. We are live once again. This is the Fantasy Football Forum. We are continuing. It is getting hot out there wherever you're at, most places. And not only is it getting hot weather wise, but it is heating up football time. We are right on the beginning of training camp. So we are getting inundated now with more news than we've had for several months since the NFL draft. With NFL news. But we are finishing up our breakdown of the offseason. And this time we're finishing our discussion for the NFC East. We have already covered, if you want to go back and look, find and subscribe. That way you know when we upload our videos. We have already gone out and covered the AFC and NFC North, the AFC East, AFC and NFC South, and now we're going to finish up the NFC East, and then soon it'll be the both AFC and NFC West to finish us off. Then after that, come early August, we're going to switch to more fantasy football focused strategies, how we're drafting, who we like, based on potential news that we have coming out. But we're going to come out again with our standings of the NFC East. And if we look at the NFC East, we look at what the realistic expectations might be, and it very well could look like what it did last year. We could see the Eagles again winning this division. They only got better as the offseason went on. The front office showed you that both by the draft and by moves that they made, where they've added pieces. The Cowboys did a lot to try and improve and try to take over, but you could still see them being a half a step behind the Eagles. The Giants as well have done some things. This is going to be second year for Brian Daboll. And then the Commanders. And we'll see what they have. They have some pretty risky moves that they're trying to see. They may have a coach on the hot seat with Ron Rivera. But if we're looking at a bowl called standing, right? What if things go a certain way? And we look at the NFC East, and last year is not going to be what this year is, right? So we have to remember that. Last year, the Eagles had one of the friendliest schedules for a team, and they were certainly a very good team. That's not to say they weren't a good team, but they could find themselves in more games that require something different than what they had to do last year. So we honestly could see the Cowboys win this division. They were a team that was right there with the Eagles, so it wouldn't surprise us to say that the Cowboys could win this division. And if it's not the Eagles taking second, what if the Giants take a step forward? What if Daniel Jones is that piece that they need, right? What if he repeats what he did last year? I know they've had the talks with Saquon Barkley, and he's now a 1-year contract this year, but that's all there. That's all done, and they're moving forward there. And what if the Eagles end up taking a third place seat? Still have a winning record. They're a very good team, but what if some of the big swings they're taking actually don't hit like we think they will? And I don't honestly see the Commanders doing much other than taking last place, but they could surprise us. So as we've done before, we're going to do it again. We're going to start last to first because that's the best way to go to end on a high note. But we're going to start with the Washington Commanders. And this is a team where, like I said, I think they have a coach on the hot seat. They have new management or new ownership. They brought in former offensive coordinator for Kansas City, now offensive coordinator for the Commanders, Eric Bieniemy. So we're happy and excited to see what he could do. As far as fantasy football relevant players, they are now without Carson Wentz, but he was replaced at the end of last year. They don't have J.D. McKissick. They don't have a wide receiver, Cam Sims, or Taylor Heineke this year. So Heineke was honestly the only one that we were looking at just because he replaced Carson Wentz. They added in free agency, though, Jacoby Brissett. So not really much in a way of adding stuff, through the draft. The biggest thing, like I said earlier, was hiring offensive coordinator Eric Bieniemy. So this could be either a more, this is one of those teams where we're excited to see the potential. What does Bieniemy do? Is it Does he take what he learned in Kansas City and apply it more in this sense? Doesn't mean it's going to be the Kansas City offense. Quarterback Sam Howell is not Patrick Mahomes. The running back is not the same. Wide receivers, I mean, they may be similar, but it starts with the quarterback position. That's what drives the engine there. So, is this going to be the Sam Howell show? Or do they go with Jacoby Brissett? Because Jacoby Brissett last year, while he was with Cleveland before the Deshaun Watson suspension was lifted, he was competent. He led that offense. And in fact, some would say he had better numbers than Deshaun Watson. So I think it might be an experiment where Sam Howell gets some potential work, but that's one thing. And as training camps are heating up, as news is coming out, you need to look at what is this, who's taking those reps? Is it Brissett? Is it Howell? Who is going to be there? I'm not really avoiding anybody in regards to the pass catchers or the players. I'm not avoiding anybody at ADP. If you're really wanting to get one of these guys at ADP, I think it's a low cost, but you're also, this guy's going to be, this guy's going to be a league winner type of thing. I like Antonio Gibson out of the backfield better than Brian Robinson. They go in the 8th round, and if you look at the trend, I mean, that's climbing for Gibson. He was going at the end of the 9th round back early on in the summer. So again, when we're looking at draft, and if you've listened to any of my videos before, or any fantasy football analyst before, if they say they like a player, you should understand context with anything that you say they like a player at ADP. Because if I say I like Antonio Gibson back in, June, and his ADP is close to the end of the 9th round, does my opinion change now? Now, in this specific example, no, but to know and recognize he is climbing, he will cost a little bit more opportunity-wise to get him, but he still is one of those, could be your 3rd or 4th running back, and a pass catcher as a 3rd or 4th running back is a very good option. He showed what he can do, and I think he has more upside than Brian Robinson, where he is that between the tackles, and it's very minimal upside if I'm looking at it. As far as the wide receiver goes, Terry McLaurin, he goes at the end of the 4th round. So you're looking at, again, he, depending on your build, he could be your wide receiver 2 or 3, and he's going that wide receiver 2 potential range. And then another potential, it depends on how you like this guy, he's going at the end, in the middle of the 8th round, is Jahan Dotson. And with the second-year wide receivers, it depends. We're looking for that breakout second years, and he's definitely one of those that towards the end, he provided some spark at the end of last year. So he's one of those very controversial players where if you like his metrics, he's going to break out. He's going to do well. There's also questions, and there are a lot of those with these second-year players that you may not like. So it really is going to depend on what you have as far as how you evaluate them. But I would encourage you, evaluate them as your own process. Don't just take somebody's word for it. I could give you a handful of stats to say this is why I like Jahan Dotson, or I could give you other stats to say this is why I don't. Again, he is probably your wide receiver 4. He's a bench play that you're betting on the upside. I think there's potential, but it all starts with Sam Howell still. So that's where this goes. Really, if you want a guy that I really like and is basically free in every draft, it's Logan Thomas. It's the tight end position. And if you draft this deep, good for you. But if not, then he's off your waiver wire. But it's Logan Thomas. He is really the only tight end of consequence for this team. So if you're not getting one of the big tight ends, Kelsey and Andrews, a Kittle, one of those types, then and you miss out and you don't really like in between guys, Logan Thomas is a guy you could punt off of and say, I'm just going to go at the end of it and just, there it is. he doesn't fit perfectly in that late tight end mold like others do because he is not the second pass catcher in this role. But again, tight end targets, I think you can separate those a little bit from wide receiver targets. We just like taking better shots when we know that the tight end is more that number two or number one pass catcher. Speaking of that, also, before we switch off on Antonio Gibson, why I like his upside more is he does not have J.D. McKissick there in the backfield taking that pass work. So more of that role goes to Gibson, who, remember, he was a wide receiver in college and he transitioned to a running back role. So there's more opportunity there with Gibson than with Brian Robinson. But moving on. New York Giants. Really, there's not a lot of loss here from a fantasy wise. The only major one is wide receiver Richie James. They lose him. He was I believe, a 600 or 700 yard wide receiver last year. And they also lost Kenny Golladay, but if you believed in Kenny Golladay, then you probably weren't winning championships last year. And then they lost Marcus Johnson, all wide receivers that they lost. But they bring in Darren Waller, tight end Darren Waller, tight end Tommy Sweeney, Paris Campbell as wide receiver, and Jamison Crowder. So replacing wide receiver loss with wide receivers and tight ends. Both, or Darren Waller specifically, a really good pass catching tight end. They did in round 3 draft Jalen Hyatt out of Tennessee. He is one of those speedsters that he could break. He could break speed wise. He's one of those fast down the field stretchers that we could see. But really, the question that we have to see from the Giants is: are they going to repeat that success that we saw them in 2022, or are they going to, suffer from everybody else got better, and there's a hole in this lineup, mainly with the wide receiver room? What does Daboll do in year 2? That's the biggest thing. And also the question is, what is Daniel Jones? Who is Daniel Jones? Do we know what he really is? Is he the guy that we saw last year? Can he vie for a top 10 finish? Or is it going to be a top 15 or 20 finish? Is it going to regress some? Obviously, the biggest signing, in my opinion, is getting tight end Darren Waller, drafting Jalen Hyatt, re-signing Saquon. They are looking to build that momentum. I see that. The one person I wouldn't avoid, or there's nobody I would avoid here. Saquon saw a dip this last week while they were having contract issues, but Saquon's still a guy that a running back that you can get. He's going at the end of the first round. I think that's very fair for his talent. I think I would take Saquon over Bijan Robinson just because I've seen Saquon do it. I've not seen Bijan do it before. So from that aspect, I would take Saquon over. I'm not really looking at getting any of these wide receivers. Most of them you can get in your double-digit rounds. If you like Paris Campbell, you can take that. I'm certainly not opposed to taking a flyer on them. But I think there's limited upside with the wide receivers. The one I like is actually the tight end, which is also the leading wide receiver, in my opinion, is Darren Waller. He goes at the beginning of the 7th round in 12-team leagues. That's really late for a guy that could lead this team as a tight end in pass catching work. He could be the Travis Kelce of the NFC East, where he's going to lead the team in targets. He has that mobility to get the middle of the field for Daniel Jones and he can work after the catch. This is a tight end that he was plagued with injury last year, so he did not show. But this is a totally different situation, new year. So we should view it that way. I really could see Darren Waller pushing for 100 plus targets. And if you're, again, you want to take a flyer on a mid-round tight end, Darren Waller is the guy I'll take over Kyle Pitts. I'd probably take over Dallas Goedert simply because Dallas Goedert has more competition. Kyle Pitts, while this could be the year, I don't I would take the potential of Waller leading the Giants in pass catching work this year. Of course, it's pending help, but he could be the guy that gets that, lead the tight end room in fantasy, not even just for the Giants, but in fantasy with targets. So, anyway, that's my 2 cents on that. Moving on down south, down to Dallas. Biggest fantasy football losses for the team is they parted ways with Dalton Schultz, parted ways with T.Y. Hilton, who had signed middle of the year last year, and parted ways with Noah Brown and Zeke Elliott. They did bring in Brandon Cooks, and they brought in Ronald Jones. Now, they also drafted tight end Luke Schoonemaker in round 2 last year. And for those that are in the Midwest, if you really want to count, in round 6, they drafted Deuce Vaughn. I don't think that's a fantasy football thing. I think that's more of I know his dad is a scout for the team, so good for him. And I'm not saying Deuce Vaughn is not going to be anything, but we should be careful saying is going to be the next Darren Sproles just because that's what he looks like. I don't know that he's necessarily going to be there. I'm not fully just buying that. Anyway, plus they have to go through Pollard as well. So the biggest offseason news, though, for Dallas was not anybody they lost outside of, yes, Zeke is a big thing, but more of the talk has been loss of offensive coordinator Kellen Moore. And then they brought in Schottenheimer, who was formerly with the Seattle Seahawks. So the question is going to be, does this team continue that pace of play that Kellen Moore had, or are they going to take a step back? Are they going to be more run focused? I don't necessarily see them being more run focused simply because the offseason moves hasn't shown that. Tony Pollard's the guy that they're going with. They've shown us that by the moves that they made or not made, that they want Pollard to be the lead back. They like his explosiveness. They like his athletic ability. They like his pass catching ability, and they like the way he can rush. All that being said, I don't think they want him to be a 300-plus touch guy. All the years in that Schottenheimer was in Seattle, those were Russell Wilson days, and what we saw, or what we thought we saw, was a very run-heavy offense. What we didn't actually look at when you looked at the numbers, that those Seattle teams passed just under the league minimum or the league average. So they weren't that run heavy. So I don't see Dallas taking a full step back and being more run heavy instead of pass heavy. I think they're going to be balanced, but we'll see. That's the biggest thing we're going to look at. I'd say I'm avoiding Dak Prescott, but at the same time, if you're going late, he has dropped. So he jumped from the beginning of the summer, but he's kind of going in that 7th round now, and he's dropped a little bit. So if he spikes, I would say I'm out, but I think he's still a good value right now. I'm not avoiding Pollard at his ADP. I think both Lamb and Pollard have very high upside. I see Lamb that could be, I take Lamb over some of the higher priced wide receivers. I think there's less concern of Lamb than there is maybe of a guy like Devontae Adams or even a guy like Tyreek Hill, where he's younger. The offense is going to be fine. One guy that I do like a lot better, though, is actually Brandon Cooks. Cooks is not as old as we think he is, right? We always think, Cooks is pretty old. But as a wide receiver, too, and for a team that should pass at around the average for the league, I don't think they're going to be much below that, if anything. Wide receiver, 2 brings in that element that I think the team itself needs. And you're getting that wide receiver, 2, right around that Jahan Dotson range in that 8th round. So I think there's value there getting that or getting him there. But I think there's value in taking Lamb early in that 2nd if he drops to the 3rd, which typically I've seen him do in drafts in past. So all values there right now. I'm probably avoiding the tight end position for Dallas just because I don't know what to make of it. So I'd like to see where it falls before I actually push any of my chips in there on that. Last but definitely not least, the Philadelphia Eagles. And very quickly, they lost Miles Sanders. They lost Zach Pascal. They lost Gardner Minshew. But they did bring in Marcus Mariota, DeAndre Swift, Rashad Penny, Dan Arnold, and Olamide Zaccheaus. So replacing and adding to every position or backup position that they needed. They brought in or they drafted a bunch of defensive ends or defensive players, mostly from Georgia, or Alabama. But they are going to be vying again for the NFC as a whole, not just the East, but the NFC. They're Super Bowl bound again. They want to be Super Bowl bound again. They showed that with who they brought in, the type of contracts that they have, but it's one of those. You're going to get it. The biggest question in player that I have, I may avoid it depending on the cost, right? This is the most expensive running back for the Eagles, and that's where I'm out if this is a pretty ambiguous backfield. I think if he drops and he's not, then I would potentially go and get him. He's not a crazy value. It's DeAndre Swift. Now, you look at me like DeAndre Swift is a dud. Why would you get him? It goes back to the same thing we were talking about with other running backs, Tony Pollard, Antonio Gibson, especially, and Gibson's later, but DeAndre Swift has that pass catching work. Now, this is a guy coming home. He's from Philly, so it's at the end of the 5th round, beginning of the 6th round. That's when he typically goes. If you're drafting him as your RB2 at most, but probably 3, I think there's opportunity there. The guy that I think has, I don't want to say league winning upside because I don't necessarily know that's league winning upside, but a lot higher upside simply because he's almost 4 rounds later is Rashad Penny. I understand Penny is injury prone, or at least that's what we see, right? At the end of the 9th round, though, the guy that does have pass catching ability and is going to be the between the field's tackles or between the tackle runner, that's the guy that in this offense I will take a stab on. I understand I just said I'm not taking that in Robinson, but the ceiling and the floor are higher for Penny. The risk is he is going to get injured. You may get 4 games out of him. You may get a whole season. More likely you might get 4 games, though. So if you're somebody that is taking a risk at let's say like a Breece Hall, and you need him in the later half, Penny's the guy that you could bridge that gap and say, I'm going to get the beginning of the season, see what he does. And then when Hall's back, if, of course, Cook doesn't sign there, then you have the ability to have a guy that as RB2, which then leads into another guy being that RB1 for you, and you have that value. So Penny's a roster construction guy for me, depending on what you want to get or how you want to build your roster. So again, Penny saying go and target him, that could be one of the worst calls. But I think the upside is there where if he plays a full season and he's there behind this offense, he's definitely go get him. As far as the wide receivers go, I don't have a good read on any. I'm not avoiding any of them. I will caution on going after Goddard in the tier that Goddard goes in tight ends. I'm probably taking the guy we talked about earlier, Darren Waller or Pat Freiermuth, simply because there's less target competition than what Goddard has. Doesn't mean I don't like Goddard, but I would take the guys going a little bit later that have less target competition than Goddard, who goes at the end of the 6th round. So that will do it today for the Fantasy Football Forum. This has been the NFC East, and we just have the AFC West and the NFC West. We're just going west to go. But again, remember, like and subscribe. Follow us. Give us follows on YouTube. We're also on Spotify, so find us wherever you find your podcast. And I will see you next time.